This is a reading of Written in Bone, Buried Lives in Jamestown by Sally Walker, Chapter 9, Part 2. And we're going to start with looking at the picture and caption on page 130. And it says, the result of these efforts is a lifelike reconstruction of HK7, the first of a colonist of African ancestry. On page 131, there's a picture with a caption that says, the archaeologists measure and document the findings of two more graves inside St. Mary's brick chapel. The second grave lies directly beneath the first. Only the feet of the second burial are visible. And the text begins and says, a feeling that moves you. As more men and women streamed into the Chesapeake region from England and elsewhere, new cities were founded. Just as Jamestown was eventually replaced by a new capital in a better location for trade, St. Mary's City gave way to Annapolis. Slowly, people moved away. The city's buildings fell into disrepair. Their wood and stone were hauled away to use to construct new dwellings and shops and churches in other towns. As time passed, soil covered the old foundations and the farmers planted their crops in the soil. St. Mary's City, like Jamestown, was forgotten, but not forever. Over the past 50 years, archaeologists and forensic anthropologists have studied the graves of more than 300 17th century Chesapeake colonists from many different sites in Virginia and Maryland. Their work is not finished. New technologies are being developed all the time. Today's young people will be the new generation of scientists who will examine colonial remains using better technologies than we have today. They will be the ones who answer the questions that we can't answer now, Owsley stated. Meanwhile, recently discovered buildings and graves at James Fort, St. Mary's City, and other colonial sites continue to provide information about America's past. No matter how many graves scientists excavate, there will always be more information to discover about the Chesapeake's first European and African settlers. Studying one or two skeletons can provide information about a single individual, who they were physically, and what they may have experienced, Carol Brula observed. But studying many skeletons provides information about an entire group of people, a population, their mortality, death, patterns, health, general activity patterns, and even cultural practices. Gruelheid has found inspiration in the chance to enhance the historical record with the discovery of physical evidence too. Skeletal remains provide us with the additional opportunity to document or confirm the historical record in a tangible way. For example, the struggle at Jamestown during the starving time or an attack on James Fort as evidenced in the remains of JR 1225B, the boy with the arrow head in his leg. Archaeological excavation of 17th and 18th century graves also gives us a new perspective on colonial customs. As Henry Miller noted, the entire subject of how 17th century Chesapeake colonists treated their dead is not recorded in historical record. As a result of excavating the graves, we have new information about burial rituals. Whether they used a shroud or a coffin, how the coffins were constructed, and the amount of care taken to bury a loved one. Such studies has helped scholars to better understand how traditions and customs from many places in England were maintained or blended together in America. There is a surprising diversity of coffin types used at St. Mary's City, some not seen before in America, Miller observed. We think this is because the Chesapeake colonists, unlike New England colonists, came from a variety of areas in England, and each area had distinctive ways of living. This is a powerful clue to enduring colonial connections that are often not expressed in written evidence. The field of medicine is enriched by forensic anthropologists as well. Colonial remains provide insight into causes of death and illness, For example, the colonists' teeth showed a much higher rate of decay after they began eating a corn-based diet compared to before. Corn is high in carbohydrates, substances that contain sugar, Olsley explained. It's also sticky, so it clings to the teeth. When corn became a main ingredient in the colonial diet, people got more cavities, which led to abscesses, which led to tooth loss. Forensic studies also showed how the bones of populations of people respond to physical labor, disease, and harsh living conditions, all of which the Chesapeake settlers knew well. The discovery that many Chesapeake colonial children suffered from rickets surprised Olsley. Historians already knew that rickets was common in England during the last half of the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution led to widespread building of factories. In those days, factories pumped large amounts of coal pollution into the air, reducing the amount of sunlight that reached the people's skin. The lack of sunlight, which provides vitamin D, caused a large number of English children to develop rickets. In contrast, the air in Chesapeake during colonial times was unpolluted by manufacturing wastes. Rickets seemed oddly out of place, but when you take the cultural custom of swaddling into account, that explains it, Olsley observed. The tightly wrapped infants didn't receive adequate amounts of sunlight or vitamin D. As more information from colonial skeletons is gathered and examined, Olsley expects that additional discoveries about health and medicine will be made. As useful and fascinating as these discoveries are, the gathering of data is not the only goal that motivates these scientists. In the words of Carter Hutchins, excavating and researching recovered artifacts is one thing, but to come face to face with a person always has an impact. Not a scary feeling, it's a feeling that moves you. At Jamestown, for example, suddenly we can associate the place with the people and the hardships they faced. It puts our work into a larger perspective. This sense of meaning, the ability to find a new connection to the past, is a recurring theme for many who have devoted their careers to archaeology and forensic anthropology. We can shed some light on who these people were and how they lived and died, Bruwelheid observed. This information lets us view history in terms we can immediately understand at the human and individual level. In knowing better the stories of these first immigrants, we might better understand how we got to where we are as a nation. Miller described his work as a sort of tribute to the people whose remains he studies. The fact that we can learn from these colonists and gain deeper understanding of them and their times is a way of giving them respect. Although their names are usually lost to time, we can still recognize their existence and honor their lives, he concluded. Olsley added, most of these people lived their whole lives without anyone writing a word about them. The information we gather from their skeletons is, in essence, their legacy. Each time an archaeologist excavates a grave, we are given the opportunity to come face to face with a person who was once someone's son or daughter. And as each skeleton reveals its secrets, history takes on a new life. The bones of the Chesapeake colonists prove that they endured pain and endless toil or frequent illness. Some lived well and some did not. Some were buried well and some were not. From the basement grave at Levy Neck to the captain's honorable resting place with his leading staff, from the simple but respectful wooden coffins of Harley Knoll to the luxurious lead coffins of St. Mary's City, the graves and the remains of colonial settlers carry a message to the people of today. They remind us not to forget their lives and accomplishments, and not to lose our connection to the past. A broken tooth, a fractured bone, an arthritic back, and strands of brown hair, all of them whisper, rest with me for a moment or two, I have a story to tell. These tales, written only in bone, await those with the patience to find them.